Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Efwanyeni. I'm the current GPSF president, and I'm happy to be with you today. Some requests were made for GPSF to help put on a program to help people who are applying for residency this year. And unfortunately, the request came a little late, and then we were able to get a panelist a little later. So here we are, but we hope that what we are able to share with you guys today, it will help everybody who's on here and people who see the recording. The event is being recorded, so everyone who is not presenting, if you're not currently speaking, please mute yourself if you're not muted. It will automatically mute you, but when you speak afterwards, please mute yourself. And I will introduce our presenters today briefly. Dr. Maxie Afari has been a member of GPSF in the past, and also he's just a huge asset to us. He always helps us whenever we need anything. And he helped to do this presentation last year, and it was hugely successful and extremely helpful. And Dr. Berko was also present. I will let them introduce themselves and tell you more about their backgrounds and then kind of share their knowledge with you guys. But we are hugely grateful to Dr. Afari and Dr. Yvonne Berko today. Dr. Prokorte may join us later on as well. So without further ado, Kwajo, is there anything else I should add?
No, I think you said everything.
Okay. And Kwajo has kind of been championing, helping medical students. He's leading the current medical student crew and helping to spearhead some of our events. So Dr. Afari and Dr. Berko are going to kind of give their presentations, and then afterwards we will have an opportunity to ask questions. The event is allotted about an hour, and hopefully we won't go much beyond that. So thank you so much, everyone. Over to you guys. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yvonne, do you want to introduce yourself? And then I can follow suit. And I have some slides that I put together 30 minutes ago that I can go through very quickly.
Yvonne is dog sweet and is having some trouble with video today, so we won't be able to see her face.
Should I go ahead?
Yeah, I don't know what's happening.
Yeah, so I can go ahead. So yeah, so my name is Maxwell. I'm an associate program director of the cardiology fellowship program at Maine Medical Center.
Hi, I am so sorry. I think my speaker was muted, so you couldn't hear me even though I was talking, but that's fine.
Oh, sorry.
Max,
Yeah.
you can go ahead.
Do you want to introduce yourself or?
Yeah,
you just go ahead. I'll just introduce myself when it gets to my turn. That's okay.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So let me get my slides back. Can you guys see my slides?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, so my name is Maxwell. I'm an associate program director of the cardiology fellowship at Maine Medical Center in Portland, Maine. And for our presentations today, the way we figured out is I could talk a little bit about, from a program director perspective.
Max,
right?
I think you sound very distant. I don't know if you want to get closer to the, you sound a bit distant and some people cannot hear you too.
Okay, can you hear me now?
It's still distant. I'm not sure if anyone else can hear.
Because I'm sitting right.
I hear him very clearly. Kwajo, are you having any trouble hearing him?
No, I can hear very clearly.
So I think
then it's me.
You may have to connect to audio. So click connect to audio and then connect over Wi-Fi, or if you're on your phone, you can dial in, and that will help you in case you're having trouble hearing. Please proceed.
Okay, yeah. So, I think I will talk a little bit about, the application from, how a program directed, what are the things that we look out for, And then Yvonne will also talk about, how to prepare for your interviews. And before I proceed, just to clarify, has everybody submitted the application?
Not yet.
No,
Not yet.
Okay,
Or type in the chat.
Okay, very good. So not yet. Okay, so I'm going to talk about some general, I think this. I presume that a lot of people may have already submitted the application. But then when we get to the question and answer section, if you have any question about ERAS, I'm happy to tell you how it looks. How your application looks from the program director perspective. What are the things that we try to screen out? And I'm happy to answer any questions. But then, for the next 5 minutes or so, I wanted to show you some general data. So let's see, So this is like hot off the press, 2021 NRMP Program Director Survey. And so in terms of, education and academic performance characteristics, what do we consider when we want to invite somebody for an interview? And as most of you would already imagine, for most students, the USMLE Step 1 score, right, always comes into play. A lot of programs will look at your MSPE to see if there are any red flags. And then other step scores, and grades in required clerkships, especially depending on what specialty you are applying to. And then things like, whether you failed your USMLE, unfortunately could be a factor depending on what program you apply to. But having said that, I would say, from a program director perspective, and just to clarify, I'm more involved in selecting cardiology fellows, a little bit involved in residents. It's never like just one criteria, right? Like you can always have somebody who has failed the USMLE score and they have like other attributes or experiences which make them outstanding candidates, and they may be considered for an interview. So, all this information is online. If you Google NRMP Program Director Survey results, you can easily pull it up. And this is like all comers. So for example, if you're applying to internal medicine residency, you can actually, when you pull up the PDF, you can specifically look for what program directors think from an IM residency point of view, or from a surgical point of view, or from anesthesia point of view. This is just all comers, okay? And then the next slide shows, so what do program directors give importance to, right, when they are considering you for interview, right? And then unfortunately, the USMLE is a big one, right? So a mean score of like 4.4. It also went, if you're a DO student, any failed attempt at the COMLEX is always, is always a factor. And then the other things like, what's your medical school accreditation status? However, your honors in clinical clerkship and all these factors, they come into play. Next slide, so again, I think we've spoken about metrics, right? Like which school are you coming from, which course, right? But I think one thing that a lot of people don't look at are your personal characteristics. And there is another slide I have towards the end, from the AAMC. And over, we are beginning to look at things beyond like metrics and looking more at, personal characteristics, which includes like experience and your attributes. So obviously, a letter of recommendation from the specialty which you are applying to. As you can see, most program directors really care about those letters of recommendation. Your personal statement, right? And it's also very important. You have to make sure that you have a well-written personal statement devoid of errors, right? And, at least make sure somebody reviews your personal statement. Over and over, we're beginning to look more for diversity, right? With the whole George Floyd thing, and there's been a lot of conversation regarding diversity in both undergraduate medical education and graduate medical education. So any attribute that you have, right, whether you're a Ghanaian American or anything that, or being an African American, you got to take advantage of that in this current era, because those are things that we're beginning to look at. And again, you can, as you can see, visa status, is quite down there, right? Fluency in language of the patient population is also, it's also a factor. So again, all this data is online. If you Google this, you have all the data available for you. And then in terms of, what is important when we are looking at the personal characteristics, professionalism and ethics. So everything is interconnected, right? So professionalism and ethics, most likely will pick that up in your MSPE or your letters of recommendation. And then guys, one thing that you don't want to mess around is, if there's any NRMP flag for MASH violation, definitely, that always becomes a factor in, in both ranking and even for an interview. And then, and then the next slides show you, like, in terms of ranking, right? Unfortunately, it's the same old things, right? Like, it's the USMLE score, MSP, your Step 2 scores, failed attempts at USMLE, similar thing, right? Like, failed attempt, could hurt you in terms of ranking. Personal characteristics, interpersonal skills, your interactions with faculty during interview or visit, feedback from the current residents. You got to be careful about this. Luckily for you guys, a lot of the interviews, or most interviews, are going to be virtual. So, when you log into your computer, you just have to remember that you're being evaluated all the time, whether it's by the faculty or the program coordinator or the current residents. You got to be very careful what you say, okay? And I personally think with the virtual, it sort of gives the applicant some control of the system, right? Where, maybe for a half day of an interview, you just have to try and be on your best behavior, okay? And so everything actually matters. Similarly, when it comes to the rank order list, and again, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because you can look this up online. And also, this is like all commerce. You can, when you pull up the PDF, you can actually specifically look at your specialty of interest, and there should be your specialty specific results. One thing I want to really emphasize is that, in the world of undergraduate medical education and graduate medical education, there is a lot of talk about holistic review of applications. And so there is something called EAM. Sometimes you hear some people talking about EACM, okay? And the C I don't have here, which is like competency. Competency is, for somebody coming from medical school, it's kind of hard for us to be able to determine competency. We still have to rely on the MSP and your letters of recommendation. So a lot of institutions, look out for, experience, attributes, and metrics, right? And, I think this is good, for the applicant, because I think, there's a lot of work in medical education to get rid of bias, okay? So of course, like, we're still going to look at the metrics, right? And the metrics, in this case, is going to be like your USMLE scores, right? And your performance, your clerkship grades and whatnot in medical school. However, as you apply this year, you should take into consideration that a lot of programs are looking for experiences and attributes, right? Everybody wants to, like, diversify their residency program. So, it comes down to, depending on, some institutions, like actually being an African American or Ghanaian American, can be an advantage because, people are looking for diversity, right? LGBTQT, right? If that's, if you are in that category, right, then, you may want to talk about, about it in your application or personal statement. Having said that, you cannot control what every program director does. Some of them obviously may still have their biases. So you have to have like a good balance. But anyway, having said that, it doesn't necessarily mean that, you need to be like lesbian or gay. But if you have any experience in being involved in like a free clinic for LGBTQT, that also qualifies, right? Because you have proven that you are somebody into and you are somebody who is willing to help like diverse patients population. Sorry, I'm referring to the sexual orientation. In terms of gender identity, for example, I know in cardiology there's a lot of effort to get more females into cardiology, and depending on what institute, depending on certain institutions, everybody wants a good mixture of males and females. And languages spoken, right? When I look at an application, I love to see, if somebody speaks like multiple languages, I always consider that as, something positive. And things like leadership, right? Being some interest group leader in medical school, and anything that shows leadership is always a consideration. And then experiences, right? A lot of programs are talking about your life experiences. Like now we care more about how did you get, you hear people talking about the distance traveled. And the distance traveled is, there are things that, to you, it may seem like simple and a no-brainer. But then I think now people are getting more excited about, for example, if you are the first person in your family to go to medical school, right? Or you're a third, first or second or third generation like immigrant, right? And people are beginning to appreciate more, the difficulties that you've gone through to be able to get to where you are, right? Because over and over we're learning that having people with those kind of experiences, right, definitely make for like good doctors, right? And so if you have any of those experiences, you want to definitely highlight it in your ERAS application. The things that we look for in terms of, and it's basically a repeat of what we saw, right? Educational background. If you are involved in, and when we talk about the ERAS application, like your volunteer experiences, you want to be very good at describing and what impact you're making, your experience with diverse populations, right? Whether it's LGBTQT or working with a free clinic with homeless people, you want to highlight all those in your application. Okay, even your experience living in a medically underserved area and your life experiences, as we spoke about. Attributes, your professional stature, which may be difficult, as a medical student, there's not much, but cultural competency and that humility. And we spoke about languages, team player, that would be highlighted in your letters of recommendation, and any sort of leadership. And then competencies, we'll skip that and talk about like metrics. And the metrics is, are the stuff that everybody knows, right? Like publications, your step 1 and step 2 scores. I think, what I want you to take out of this is that you just have to remember that it's not just metrics. Now we are also looking out for attributes and your personal characteristics or experience. So you want to highlight that in your application, okay? And then when we come to the question and answer section, I'm happy to answer any specific questions about, where to put certain stuff in your ERAS application. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Max. Can I go on?
Yeah, go ahead, yeah.
Okay, all right. So I'm so sorry I cannot put on my camera. I wish I could, but I just can't. And so please bear with me and just follow the presentation. So my name is Dr. Yvonne Berko. I am a policy specialist in Atlanta. I finished my residency back in 2018 and I served as a chief resident for 1 year. So I'm quite familiar with the interview process. And so I just want to start by saying congratulations to all of you. If you've gotten this far, if you're applying for residency, it means that the bigger part of the journey has already been traversed. And so congratulations to all of you. And I also say that once you get an interview, it is fair game for everyone. So when they call you for an interview, it means that they like you on paper and they want to see if they will like you in person. So just put in mind that once you are there, regardless of whoever is there, their scores, their background, their experiences, it's a level playing field for all of you, okay? Having said that, there's some things that you need to prepare or you need to get done before and during and after the interview, okay? So I said it's a level playing field for everyone, but you can make or unmake your interview experience. So I think Dr. Max spoke about personal statement, and he said that it should be devoid of every error and all that. You have to let someone look through it for you. I know it's a personal statement, it has to be personal, but we've seen personal statements out there. They have samples on the internet. As much as it should be personal, I think it should also be different. So we have different personal experiences that made us become doctors or made us want to do internal medicine or BGYN. As much as possible, make it unique. I've gone over a lot of personal statements, and it's all about how maybe I got sick, and when I looked at the doctor, the way the doctor treated me, I wanted to be a doctor too. Or some would say that maybe they lost a family member, and because of that, they want to be a doctor. Those are really common. And so sometimes just look and see if there's any way you can kind of tweak your experience so that it's not like the common ones out there, okay? So that's what I'll say about the personal statement, and of course what Dr. Max also said. And then also your ERAS application. As much as possible, let someone also look over that for you, okay? Because sometimes there are other experiences that you may have that you may not think that it's even important to put it in there, but someone who has been through it before can prompt you and tell you that, hey, this you can put in your CV and it will help you. And then we'll go to the interview prep. So now with COVID, I'm sure a lot of interviews is going to be on either Zoom or WebEx. It's going to be a virtual interview. And so let me talk about the virtual interview. Just a little bit of tips for the virtual interview. So make sure that your background is professional or it's neutral. The background should be neutral. Don't sit in a too busy background. I remember last year, I was coaching someone through the interview and the background was just too busy. And I realized that my focus was on the background and I wasn't really listening to her. So she said a whole lot of things I could not even remember. And I told her, you know what? All my mind has been on your background. So I think you need to change that background. So maybe a plain white background, like sit behind the wall. Yeah, don't put many posters behind you. And then especially for those of us, for those of you who may be in Ghana or in a place where the service may be poor, make sure that you try it with someone else. Because again, this same person's, the internet was so bad, so you had to change services here and there before it worked. So make sure you try your device and the internet before your day of interview. And then also eye contact. I know it's difficult to keep eye contact behind a computer, but what I've realized helps is when you look into your camera, when you look directly into the camera, it gives the interviewer an illusion that you're looking at them. So avoid looking down and just being fidgety on camera. And you should also be fully dressed. I know it's a virtual interview, but we've all heard stories where people were just probably wearing a blazer on top and they were wearing something else down there and they had to get up and we all know what happened. So make sure you're fully dressed, okay? Just dress like you would dress when you're going for an in-person interview. And then set up early. Even though it's a virtual interview, I mean, devices can mess up here and there. So make sure you set up early, probably 15 to 20 minutes before the time you set up. Make sure that everything is working, your microphone is working, your cameras are working. And as much as it's a virtual interview, they are still watching you. It is difficult to read someone over the internet or read someone on screen, but they're still trying to figure you out. So make sure you're putting up your best behavior. Don't out-talk your colleagues, and don't be too quiet. There should be a fair balance. You shouldn't be too quiet. You shouldn't also out-talk your colleagues. I think that's all I'll say for the virtual interview. And if you do go for an in-person interview, it's the same thing. Just make sure you get there early, you are dressed well, you carry yourself in a confident but not cocky way. Answer questions when you are asked, give other people a chance to also to talk. What else? Hold on one second. And then last year, I think someone asked a question about the letter of intent. So letter of intent is when you are interested in a program and probably they have not called you for an interview yet, and you want to express your interest in the program. So that is a bit dicey. Just be careful. I mean, if you send one email, that's fine, but people will keep sending emails upon emails, and that can really tick the program directors off. Some would even come into the program personally to see the program director. I remember when I was in residency, someone did that, and it was a no-no. The program director was so ticked off that they didn't call the person because it was like the candidate was stalking him. Okay, so you can send one email. I think one email is enough. Okay, and then the post-interview follow-up. Make sure you send it early. Don't wait till about a week or 3 days, 4 days. As much as possible, 24 hours, just send an email. Some would ask, should it be a handwritten letter? Should it be a card? I think it can be anything. An email should suffice, as long as it is a professional email. And avoid cutting and pasting. You know, sometimes you are interviewed by so many people, and you may write one email and there's a temptation to copy and paste it to the rest of the people. You can do that, but make sure you edit it. So you don't want to send what you send to Dr. Max to Dr. Berko. Then I know this is not my email, okay? And also make it personal. So whenever you are interviewing with someone, make sure there's something personal, something that you guys talked about that you can refer to in your thank you letter, okay? I'm gonna go through a few common questions that you may be asked during the interview, okay? And the mistakes that we all make or candidates make. So they will tell me about yourself. Inevitably, they may ask you. And sometimes it's the first question that they will ask you. It's like when you meet someone, you want to get to know the person. So it's like, introduce yourself to me. Most of us will make the mistake by just rattling who you are, where you live, whether you are married or not married, and all that. All that is in your ERAS application, and the person who's interviewing you already knows that. So when they ask you to tell them about yourself, in that 2 minutes is an opening for you to sell yourself. That whatever you say should interest the interviewer to know more about you. So what are your strengths? What are your values? What accomplishments have gotten you here? Like, who are you as it relates to the residency program you are trying to apply for? Okay, so that should be your opening statement to sell yourself to the person who's interviewing you. And it shouldn't be too long. At least 2 minutes should be okay. And then they'll ask you, why should we hire you? Again, you're talking about your strengths. What are you bringing on board? And it's not enough to just list attributes. Oh, I'm hardworking, thorough, I'm a team player, so you should hire me. If you say all these things, you should back it up with examples, okay? So you're a team player. Give me an example of a time that you acted as a team player, right? You're a go-getter. What have you done in your life that qualifies you as a go-getter? So whatever you say, there should be a tangible example behind what you are saying. So that it's not like you're just listing things that attributes that you've seen of doctors and you're just listing them, okay? And then when they ask you about your strengths, and then one thing that I also have to talk about is your weakness. we've all heard how people will tell you, oh, they will either say, I don't have a weakness, which is so wrong. Everyone has a weakness. Or they would say, pick a strength and then turn it around to be a weakness. I mean, that is wrong. Whatever the weakness is, the most important thing is the interviewer wants to know how you have overcome or how you are working on that weakness. So don't say, oh, my weakness is I can't say no to people, and so I'm always working hard. You get it? Yeah, that's not a weakness. If your weakness is public speaking, what have you done to work on that weakness? So are you trying to talk to people more to people? Are you probably doing this or doing that just to improve your public speaking skills? So whatever the weakness is, you have to demonstrate that you first of all, you've identified that weakness and you are also working on this. And this is what you have done, and this is how far you have come with the weakness. And then sometimes they will ask you also why you want to be in that program, right? Why this particular program or why this particular specialty? So whenever you're called for an interview, just make sure that you do your background search very well about the program. And if you know other residents who are in the program, you can ask them about the program so that at least they know that you know about your program. And then when they ask you why, for instance, why internal medicine, those questions they may ask you. So come up with a good answer. Why do you want to be an internal medicine specialist? Or I mean, internal medicine resident or an OBGYN resident? That's one thing I was going to talk about, but I just forgot. Okay. Yeah, so just make sure, and then also practice. Yes, practice, practice, practice. Practice your interview skills. Don't just walk in there without practicing. So I'm not sure when you guys will start the interview process, but at least give yourself 1 month of thorough practice. And when I say practice, I don't want you to be stereotyped. So don't kind of memorize your answers so that when they ask you a question, you just flow like a robot. No, it should be fluid, but it shouldn't also sound rehearsed. So at least when you practice your interview skills, you know what questions they're going to ask you and what answers you're going to come up with, but it should be fluid. It shouldn't be too stereotyped, okay? And don't be so forthcoming with the answers. I mean, I've interviewed some people, and before you even end the question, they're already answering the question. It's like, oh, like, tell me about yourself. Oh, my God, you see, like it sounds so robotic and it sounds so rehearsed, and it doesn't make the interview interesting. Okay. And then also, like with the in-person interview, you also have to watch your body language and then the non-verbal cues. Okay. So don't be throwing your hands in the air. You know, if you know that you are somebody who gesticulates a lot when you are talking, put your hand somewhere that you can control it. Don't be throwing your hands in the air and be fidgety in the chair. And this comes with practice. Okay. And of course, eye contact. And there's sometimes that as much as we practice the interview questions, there's sometimes that some questions will be asked that you had no idea that you're going to ask you, or you didn't have an answer. Make sure that you're thinking on your feet. And when you're thinking on your feet, make sure whatever you are saying, you have a story to back it up. Don't lie, but if you're thinking on your feet, make sure that whatever you are saying is something that sounds plausible. I think that is all I have to say. We'll leave the rest for the Q&A.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Afari and Dr. Berko. Those were really excellent points. There were, suggestions. I can only tell people about what not to do. And so you can DM me after the meeting. But those were some really excellent points in terms of things that you can do. We can open it up for questions. There was a question from Joan earlier about a different type of profile. Joan, can you please speak to that again? You can type it if you don't want to speak. Is Joan still on here?
I'm still on.
Okay.
So with they've released some pathways for application this year. That's for ECFMG certification. It has nothing to do with the application. I wanted to ask if you knew anything about the pathways. And if I could, with the pathway that I'm on, I'm supposed to look for doctors to evaluate me. It has nothing to do with the application, but I kind of need it for my certification. So I wanted to know if there were some doctors in the Atlanta area who I could speak to.
So I mean, at Atlanta, you can speak to me. I'm willing to help as much as I can.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So can I contact you after the?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Maxie and Yvonne, would you mind giving your emails maybe in the chat so that people can see?
Okay. Yeah, sure.
And then if you felt like sharing your number, you can also put that in. Any other questions? Please ask, this is your opportunity.
Hi. Okay, Emanuela, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Emanuela. I'm applying family medicine. My question is about the ERAS and the experiences. How do you balance explaining what you did and what you learned? Because I try not to be too wordy, and I know I want to have mercy on my readers. So how do you kind of balance that? And along the same lines with the format of the experience, do you prefer more of a narrative or bullet points?
Yeah, I can take that. That's a very good question. You know, personally, bulleted versus narrative, it doesn't matter to me as long as, you know, you go straight to the point. And as you pointed out, not too wordy. But my sense is that a lot of people actually prefer like the bulleted point. I've been on some calls where, I think for some program directors, they're able to conceptualize things when they're in a bullet form. But I think the most important thing is communication. If you're able to communicate what exactly you did, that is what matters. Like, I'm looking through like the cardiology fellowships application right now. And I think a lot of residents actually, they have very nice narratives, and in 4 lines, they're able to tell you what exactly their experiences are. And having said that, I think the most important thing is, and I think this is a very good question, because sometimes I think the mistake that applicant makes is you list your experience and you don't explain what exactly was your role. I think that doesn't help you, because something that, let's say volunteer experience, right? You could be in Ghana and let's say you did like a hypertension screen, right? It's not every program director who is necessarily going to understand, what involved, like how often that is done. So you definitely need to describe that experience. So that bullet point on narrative, for me, it's fine as long as you go straight to the point, right? Because if you're being wordy, right, that's also, I'm going to just move on, right? Because nobody has time to read like multiple paragraphs. So I think in 4 or 5 lines or 4 or 5 bullet points, you should be able to say what exactly was your role, and also give some tweak to it to let me feel that that experience was something important.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions?
Yes, I have a question. My question is about the timelines when should we expect like to get interviews like between the ERAS like application, like when you apply, when should I expect like to hear from a program if I'm very interested in that program, and like so that I can decide when I'm going to send a letter of intent or something like that?
All right. Yeah, sure. I can answer that question. So when does the application open? On the 16th of September, right?
So I think this time they open it on the 1st, and they said that programs will be able to view it on the 29th.
29th, okay. So I know some programs that would send interviews out on the very first day that they see it. I don't know how they do it. I'm thinking they need time to, even if they're going to use their machines to kind of filter out the applications, it will take time. But I know some programs that sent, I remember our time, it was like the 16th of September. And I know people got interviews on that same day. But let's say September, by November, if you haven't gotten an interview from a program that you really want to interview, I think you could send that letter of intent. And the letter of intent, I must say that it can make or break you. So it should not be too long. It should be very short and very precise, just why you're interested in their program and what you are bringing on board, if they give you a chance. Yeah, at least these two points. It shouldn't be too wordy, okay? And again, you send it one time and then that's it. Don't send it the second time. Don't follow it up with a phone call. You either send an email or I would even advise against phone calls. I don't know what Max thinks. I would say just send an email. Don't call. I'm not sure what Max thinks.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you won't be able to get hold of the program director. It goes through the program coordinator. And I know that my program coordinator does not like phone calls. You know, you are better off, you know, actually sending an email. And then, you know, and I think this is the tricky part about the letter of intent, right? Like you just sending an email and saying, hey, like, you know, I want my application to be considered, right? To be sincere with you, it's not helpful because, you know, I think every program is different. Like, you know, for a fellowship program director, I only review 450 applicants. So I actually make it a point in going through every single application. I think residency, that may not be practical, depending on how many people are reviewing applications. If you're going to send a letter of intent to a program, I think the point I'm trying to make is that make sure that there's a very good reason, right? Like just saying, hey, look at my application. And, you know, those emails, 90% of them get deleted. But in your letter of intent, you have to make it clear that, you know, the ones that are helpful are like, oh, like I really want to come to Maine because, you know, my wife's family is from Maine, right? So I'm like, okay, I got to look at that. Sort of prompts me to actually go back and look at the applicant's application. And I think, you know, the timeline that Yvonne mentioned is also very important because, you know, from a fellowship program director, unfortunately, some of those letter of intents, I get them a little bit late when I've already sent out an interview. I've sent out the interviews and then I get emails from people saying, hey, like, you know, I'm actually from Maine and I really want to come back home, right? So make sure you don't send it too late, because if you send it late and the interviews, you know, we've already sent out interviews, there's nothing I can do about that unless there are cancellations. So you have to be timely in sending out those letters. And when you got to think very carefully when you send those letters, make sure that it is very dedicated to that program and say exactly, you know, why, you know, you really want to come to that program. What I've seen applicants do is that sometimes, you know, they send it to like multiple programs and it's kind of funny. Like sometimes I look at those emails and they actually mention the wrong program because of the, you know, cut and paste. They end up mixing programs. So you got to be careful about those things.
There was a question in the comments about if there was a place in the ERAS for community-based experience and service. And there was a response from Kwejo saying to use the volunteer option for those. And then there was a question about, do you need any supporting documents with you on the day of interview?
Yeah, so I agree. You can definitely put that information in the volunteer experience. That's a perfect place to put that information. In terms of documents, I say 99% of the time, it's not helpful. But what I've seen some applicants, the only time I'll bring any document is like if, let's say, in between the time you were called for an interview and the time you show up for your interview, if let's say you magically have like 5 new publications, there's nothing wrong with, coming in with your CV and say, hey, like since I applied, there's some significant update to my CV. So, here's a copy of my CV, but there's no use in bringing your personal statement. Everybody has access to that. Your CV also, a lot of people have access to it. And then even this example that I'm talking about, in terms of updates, it probably just makes sense to email it to the program coordinator, because on interview day, there's just like diverse interviewing faculty, right? So like you giving them the paper right there, right? They don't have time to like go through all that and ask you questions, right? So if there's a significant update, send it to the program coordinator / director in case you think that can help you for your interview. Generally, I don't think it's helpful to bring copies of your application.
Thank you guys so much for those responses. Now I'm curious, I haven't done this for a few years. And so I'm wondering, do they still do the group interviews if it's virtual? Like where you're interacting with groups before you go into your interview, because back in the day, they used to use that to see how people would interact with other people. It was an unofficial interview in a way. Are you conversational? Are you normal? Are you somebody that they would like to hang around? Are you somebody who keeps to themselves? Or is it just the one person interviewing the entire day? Does anybody have the answer to that?
So I know last year, my program did virtual interview, and I think the interview was one-on-one, but they had like a group, it was not like an interview. It's like a social interaction, but it was still on Zoom. So they picked a few of the residents and the chief residents, and then they met the candidates on Zoom. So it was just like being in person, but doing the same thing on Zoom. So it was like introducing yourselves. If you have any questions, you ask the residents, and then they answer. So it's more of what they would have done if they were in person. Yes, they did that on Zoom. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's, obviously every institution is different. Over here, it's faculty and candidate 1:1. However, they have like a group, like typically, at lunchtime, there's a group Zoom meeting whereby you put the applicants and the residents, the current residents or fellows, into a chat box, right? And that is actually, an opportunity for the student to ask, the residents about, rental, right? Conferences, right? So, they tell you that those are non-evaluative, but you got to be very careful because, as I showed you in the slide, program directors do get feedback from their residents and fellows, right? If you were super awkward, and that gets back to the program director, and it can sort of hurt your chances. One other thing that they're talking about, I think some institutions would be, you have to be ready for this. Some institutions are doing what we call the campus live visit, right? Even though everything is virtual, all the interviews are virtual, some programs are going to do what we call the campus visit, kind of what you did for your undergrad, whereby, if you want to come to Portland, Maine, like let's say you've applied and you were interviewed in Portland, Maine, right? And you've submitted your rank list and the program has also submitted their rank list. Some programs are offering the option of the applicant can actually travel to Maine because, the problem with the virtual interview is that for some of you students, you've never been to some of the places you are applying to. And there is this arrangement whereby you come to the institution kind of like a college, you're kind of like college tour, right? And you get the opportunity to interact with the residents, right? You check the city, and the whole plan around this is that is not going to affect, at least from what I know, most institutions, that will not affect your rank list. Actually, they prefer that gets scheduled after the program has put in their rank list. It would be more important for the applicant to be able to check out the hospital and check out the city. And the fact that you show up or not for that is not going to affect your positioning on the rank list. And the whole idea is that, nothing that you do, right, during those, campus kind of visits, because they want to maintain equity and fairness, right? You don't want to push some students to feel like obliged to come for those visits. So be on the lookout for that. Some institutions will be offering you those opportunities, and it's not supposed to affect your rank list. But having said that, there is one scenario, like everybody's going to tell you that it's not going to affect your rank list, but there's one scenario which like every program director has been asking, which is, what if an applicant comes to that campus tour, right? And then they make some racist comments or anti-Semitic comments, right? Like, if that information gets to me as a PD, right, it's kind of, in my conscience, it's kind of difficult for me to just close my eyes onto. And I don't know the answer to that question. So even though it doesn't affect your rank list, when you go for those visits, try not to be awkward, try not to be a douchebag, because, they may tell you one thing, but you don't know what they're doing. It may actually affect you. It's not going to boost your application, but if you do something crazy, I can see that affecting your rank list.
Can you guys speak to what scores? Some people had questions about, like, if applying for internal medicine or pediatrics or, some of the common ones. What scores do they have to worry about? Do you guys know the answer to that?
Okay. I'll speak for the programs that I know. And I'm glad that you brought this question up, because I wanted to talk something about red flags on your application. So most of the programs I know, and this is when I applied, I'm not sure, I don't know if it has changed. Some programs will say 220 is a cutoff. Others will say 230 is a cutoff. So far, the lowest score I have heard is 220. Having said that, there are some programs who will give a cutoff, but they will still interview people who did not meet the cutoff. So if you had less than 220, that doesn't mean you are out of the game. Some programs will say 220, but they will still interview someone who had 210. Probably that because there's something else on the application that interests them. Okay. So if you're applying to a program, just look at different programs have different cutoffs. Just look at their cutoffs and then apply. Sometimes you may not meet their cutoff, but you just feel like applying. I would say just apply. There's no harm in applying. As long as you have enough resources to apply, they may just call you for an interview. And I want to talk about red flags. So if a program calls you and probably you have an attempt, maybe you failed step 1 or you failed step 2 or whatever it is, be prepared to answer questions about your red flags. They will definitely ask you. One of the interviewers will ask you. So be prepared to have an answer. For example, if you failed step 1, you should have an answer for it. And in the answer, whatever the reason may be, don't put yourself out of why you failed. At least take responsibility for your failure and demonstrate how you learned from that experience and how that has helped you. So for instance, maybe step 1, you didn't do well, but step 2, you aced step 2. You can tell them why you feel that you failed. Maybe you didn't learn well. Maybe you're not prepared. Maybe you're in a hurry just to apply because you thought time was going against you. But because you failed, you did that, this, and now these are the scores that you've had. I was helping someone last year, and so she applied her scores were fairly okay. She didn't have an attempt, I think, but she applied and she didn't match. And so during our interview practice, I asked her, so what if they ask you that, why didn't you march last year? And she said, oh, I would say that because my scores were not good. And I said, no, you cannot say that because your scores have not changed. Whatever scores you came with last year, you're coming with the same scores. If they haven't asked you about your scores, don't make it about your scores. You can say probably you didn't interview well. Your interview skills were not good, but you've improved on your interview skills and you've come back better. You get it? So I'm saying this to say this. Whatever red flags are on your ERAS application, it may be an MSPE. There was one guy I interviewed. I think he had a problem with his chief residence as a medical student. And I saw that and I had to ask. And he became very defensive. You get it? So whatever red flags there are, make sure you own it and then you explain it to your advantage, if that makes sense.
So one of the things that I would add is making sure you find somebody to practice with. And I don't know, you know, Maxie and Yvonne are here, Dr. Afari and Dr. Berko, but they could also get overwhelmed. And so Maxie and Yvonne, if things get overwhelming in terms of people asking for help with interviewing and things like that, please let us know. And we can try and see if there are other people who are willing to help. And we'll reach out anyway and try to ask if there are people willing to help to prepare people for these interviews. But just have somebody to practice with and have some answers prepared. And it can be, you know, it can be somebody who's gone through the process, and it could also be anyone, but just get practice on some of the responses that you're giving.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I'm going to be honest and say in advance, right? I personally, unfortunately, I do not have the time to be able to do the one-on-one interview practice, because for the cardiology fellowship, I'm in the middle of like my own recruitment season, and for us, interviews start next week. So, you know, I'm happy to reply, you know, if, you know, any questions that come through like the email or whatever, I'm happy to reply, but I won't be able to, I will not be available for a one-on-one interview practice until my recruitment season is over.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. That is very helpful.
And then something I was going to add in terms of the red flags, you know, sometimes what I see is that, you know, sometimes applicants need to be proactive and address the red flag in their, either in their personal statement. If you look on your ERAS application, I'm trying to look at, there's a place actually, you know, on your ERAS application, for example, like if you're, you know, in some schools when you don't pass your step 1, they, you know, they extend, you know, your time in the medical school. And you know, I know for sure, and I have some applications here that I'm looking at. There is a place that you can actually explain why your medical school, you know, was extended, right? And for me as a program director, the worst thing you can do as an applicant is to have like a lot of, you know, like to have like a lot of red flags and not address them. If you don't address them, the problem is that I'm not going to waste an interview spot on you to have you come to the interview for me to figure out why those red flags are. And if you're an outstanding candidate, like there are some things that I'll close my eyes on, like let's say you failed step 1 and then you repeated a step 1 and it's like, you know, you scored 240 or whatever, and then step 2, step 3 are perfect. I would give you the benefit of the doubt because you know, it's obvious that something happened around your step 1. But from my experience, you know, people who fail their steps, a lot of times like their repeat steps like are not that high anyway. I think, you know, it may be helpful to address, you know, if you address it in your personal statement, because literally for fellowship, there are people that I interview, even though they fail steps, right? But clearly the reason why they fail their steps is like when they were in resident, like they failed their step 3 or whatever, when they were in their residency, maybe they had a child who had some behavioral problem, which, you know, there was some family stressor at that point, right? But then subsequently they've done very well throughout their residency. So it's very important for you to, if there's a red flag, most PDs are not going to, just invite you blindly so that you get opportunity to explain it. You should try to address it sooner than later so that people can, because people cannot read your mind.
Hello,
Thank you
everyone.
very much.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add something, like, because Dr. Yvonne Berko basically also said that if you're invited for an interview, it means like it's a fair game for everyone, right? So I was talking to the PD for vascular surgery at Georgetown, and then he was telling me that, one thing he hates is they would interview someone who had, like, let's say a low step 1 score. And after the interview, the person would email him and say, oh, hey, Dr. Brownreds, thank you for inviting me for an interview, even though I had a low step 1. He was like, oh my God, you just reminded me that you had a low step 1. So, whilst you talk about your red flags, the moment you get an interview, it's a fair game for everyone. So do not remind them why they shouldn't even take you. So just wanted to add that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kwajo. So there was a question in the comment. We've gone over time, and we will be ending very soon. If there are any questions, people should quickly ask so that we can have it out there. I guess somebody asked if U.S. clinical experience and externship goes under work experience in the ERAS application. And the answer was yes, clinical experience should go under work experience. And regarding the documents, and Maxie already said this, agreed, it's a moot point that is, since it'll be virtual, you can send updates to the program coordinators. So those were some of the comments. While we're waiting for some last questions, does Jesse want to say something?
Yes, thank you so much for the presentation and the opportunity. With regards to the US clinical experience, in case, for instance, I'm applying for family medicine and I rotate through maybe neurosurgery, does it matter?
So you're applying for family medicine and you have a letter from neurosurgery. Is that sorry, you have an experience on neurosurgery. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is that your question?
Yes, please. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. It is kind of tricky, right? There's no there's no right or wrong answer to this, okay? The example you gave is a little bit extreme, right? So, but what I can tell you is that, like, let's say you're applying for family medicine and let's say you did, internal medicine, it's a little bit closer, right? Neurosurgery has got nothing to do with, family medicine. However, a lot of program directors, right, they are just happy that, the applicant has some US experience at all, right? So it might not be a negative thing. The issue with family medicine is that sometimes, and this is what my wife is a family medicine attending, and what I learned in the field of family medicine is that they are always suspicious about people using family medicine as a backup plan, right? So it's kind of, it could be a little bit weird that, you rotated in all these other specialties except for family medicine. But if that's what you have, I guess you do have some, experience and maybe it might help you a little bit. Otherwise, I think most specialties, like, they just want some US clinical experience. But if you want, if you're applying for family medicine, I think, again, just to repeat, like, they have sometimes they worry that people are using them as backup, right? So they're actually looking for people with that experience. That's the only problem. That's the only issue I could point out.
Very well, thank you.
Somebody asked if we were going to be assigned to mentors. The rate limiting component is, people who are willing to volunteer for the event or for that assignment. And so, we will not be assigning mentors, but we will try to help as much as possible those people who are seeking help, try to pair them up with people. But right now, we don't have anybody who has signed up to be mentors. Unfortunately, not a lot of people are in education, and those who are in education are kind of overwhelmed during this season. And so currently we don't have people who are assigned to be mentors, but we will ask. So people who need help, just kind of reach out to me, Dr. Yeni, or email Ghana Physicians USA, and we'll try to do our best to help. Also, I just like to plug in that it's free for medical students to join GPSF. And so just go to our website, GhanaPhysiciansUSA.org, and sign up. And that way we'll know that you're members and we can let you know about things that we have going on. Somebody asked if you can use old letters of recommendation from the previous year. What are your answers to that, please? I would probably suggest against that, but I think if you can reach out to those people to make it current, that would be more, that would probably be better. But I don't know what Yvonne and Maxie think.
Yeah, I agree. I think I share similar supplements, like similar sentiments. And when I see, an old letter, for me, that means that, the person applied last year and they didn't match, right? And my bias is, actually, I don't have bias against people applying again, but my bias is that, it's kind of like you didn't match and you're submitting the same data and you're hoping for a different outcome, right? So I think, that is, that's my personal view. I think that's like a lazy approach. But having said that, let's say if you're an international medical grad, right? And let's say one of your letters is from a rotation that you did last year, and they happen to write that letter last year, I wouldn't use it against you because I know that if they rewrote the letter this year, it's probably going to be the same information. But to submit 3 or 4 letters, which are all from last year, and for me, that is a red flag that you haven't changed anything in your application for the coming academic year. I don't know if that answers your question, or if this is like a specific scenario that you want to describe.
What's your thought on supplemental application? Signaling of programs has been introduced and is optional.
So let's see your thoughts on supplemental application. Can you, Samuel, can you explain this a little bit more?
Okay. Sam, does he want to speak or do you want to type?
I can speak.
Okay, wonderful.
All right. So currently the application process, they've introduced a supplemental application, and they request that like you write certain things concerning your program, concerning yourself, and they're given the opportunity to signal 5 programs out of the many you'll be submitting applications to. And this process in itself is optional. So I'm asking about like your thoughts, because if you signal a program, the program is going to get a notification that you've signaled them and you would want to be in their program, but they have only 5 slots for that. But this whole process is optional. So I was asking your thoughts concerning this, because this is a new thing they introduced this year.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'll have to look into this. I wasn't aware of this. What I know is that in the past, like some programs would send you the applicant supplemental application, and and the question is like, why exactly do you want to come here, right? And I personally find that annoying. But this signaling, I'll have to look into it. I don't have an experience with it.
All right, thank you.
What should guide our choices? Thank you for that question, Samuel. What should guide our choices? Should one choose hospitals based on their pattern of recruitment, i.e. IMG friendly or not? Are there hospitals you will never advise an IMG or a Ghanaian, to be specific, not to apply to?
Yeah, I think I answered that question. I just typed it. I'm not sure if it showed up. I think you should look at the profile of the residents in the program. I know Frida Online, or sometimes when you go on their personal websites, you see pictures of their residents. What we know is that typically, if they've not been known to be IMG friendly in quotes in the past, chances are that they may not hire you. But then again, Dr. Mas just spoke about how programs are trying to diversify their residents. And so who knows, you could be the first IMG in your program. So again, it goes with your resources. And sometimes you just have the gut feeling that you should apply to this program. So if you meet their criteria for hiring and you're an IMG and you don't see any IMG, I think you should still apply. You could be the first IMG. But as much as possible, make sure you apply to most IMG programs, okay? If you're gonna apply to programs, make sure that you're applying to IMG programs as well. IMG friendly programs.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Yvonne. You know, when I was applying years ago, and you know, I'm an IMG. You know, the rule of thumb back then was, you know, try and apply to like 20% of the programs which are outside your reach, and then 20% of programs that you think, you know, from your perspective, you are like, oh, these are like low-level programs, which even though I would say for an IMG, you should never really look at a program as low-level, but, you know, depending on your scores and your experiences and how confident you feel, you want the outliers too, right? Because the 20% below are your safety to prevent you from not matching. And then 20% above, you know, are programs that you feel are out of reach, but you've looked at your application and you're like, listen, if they are diversifying their residency pool, why can't I try? And then, you know, the rest of the 60% should be programs, you know, within your reach, and that requires you going into to the program's website, right? So if you're an IMG, obviously, you want to look at a lot of programs which are IMG friendly. And the other thing I want to remind you is that even though I talk about diversity, unfortunately, the diversity doesn't always, you know, apply to like, you know, trying to get more IMGs into the programs. And if a program is an AMG program to begin with, if they are diversifying, what they're talking about is like they're trying to get, you know, African-American US graduates, more US graduates into their program, right? They're probably not going to drastically change to international, you know, medical graduates. But, you know, I think one thing I learned from the process is that don't overthink it, okay? Just go with your gut feeling, as Yvonne said, because you never know. Some program may say their cutoff is, you know, 240 and you have 220 and you apply and, you know, they interview you and you can actually match there. In terms of programs that IMGs should not apply to, I mean, I think, I hate to say, I think if you have the money, you should apply to every program possible. However, you know, I think there has to be some realistic, right? So if you're an IMG and let's say you have a score of 205 or 210, right? I personally think it doesn't make sense trying, and maybe you don't have like extensive research experience or clinical experience. It doesn't make sense to apply to like, you know, Mass General Hospital or Duke University or Columbia University, because if you go and look at the profile of the residents on those websites, it's a totally different ball game, right? These are programs that sometimes a lot of American grads cannot get to these programs anyway. So you have to be true to yourself, look at your scores. You know, obviously if your score is in the 260s, right? And you have extensive like research experience, I would definitely encourage you to apply to some of these Ivy League, to always apply to the Ivy League programs, because you're as good as an American grad, okay? But again, it all comes down to money. Like, this advice is based on money. Like, if there's a limitation to how much you can spend, then I would say you got to be smart in how you apply. Programs, like there are some programs who have never taken an IMG. So maybe your money, you shouldn't bet your money on them. But if you have unlimited resources, you should apply to everywhere and take your chances.
Thank you very much. There's another question, and I'm thinking that will be our last. If you graduated medical school in 2015 and the program criteria says 5 years or less preferred, is it wise to apply there? My personal feeling would be, if your experiences are current, that maybe it's okay, but I don't know what the experts think. Maxie or Yvonne, can you please speak to it?
Yeah, personally, I've gone through this process before. There were programs that I applied to who had like certain step 1 score limits. And, 10 years ago when I went through the process, I applied anyway, and I got interviews from some of those programs. And, and there are going to be programs, who say 5 years, but I think you need to look at your application in a whole, right? Like, when I did this 10 years ago, I had like, straight out of med school, I spent 2 years doing research, and I had like extensive publications before I applied for residency. So I'm like, okay, like, let me try. They may look beyond, right? Like scores, right? And that happened to work for me. So I think, if you have, other things in your application that, I think it's part of what we're saying is like, if you have a financial limitation, then you should probably apply to most programs. Like, first of all, select the programs that you qualify for based on what their website says. And then if you want to expand beyond that, and I would say, like, yeah, if I look at an application and somebody applied 10 years ago, right, and they've won several awards during med school, they have publications, right, and I would invite them for an interview, like, so just so that you guys know, like, when I go to ERAS, and I think I suspect this is what most program directors do. So I'm able to screen applicants for, there are so many things you can screen them for. Like, I can screen people by USMLE scores. I can ask ERAS to pull up, all the medical students, from the state of Connecticut or whatever, right? And then, typically my method is like, if there's somebody I'm screening out because they don't meet, whatever USMLE scores criteria, before I screen them out, like, I actually go back and look at everybody. Again, like, it's a little bit different because it's a fellowship program and I only get 500 applicants. But by the end of the day, I actually, we go through all those 500 applicants because nobody wants to mess, like, let's say, let's say you have somebody who won the Nobel Prize, right? And I would look stupid if I screen them out just because their scores were low. So a lot of programs would actually, if they're screening somebody out, we go back and look at the application and try to determine, is there something special about this, applicant, right? So if you have more than 5 years and you feel like your application is very strong and you have a lot of positive attributes, I would say go for it.
Thank you guys so much. We really appreciate it. People can feel free to email GhanaPhysiciansUSA@gmail.com to reach us if they have any other questions. Dr. Afari and Dr. Berko also were really kind and they gave their email addresses. And so if you have any quick questions, you can email them. If you have questions that you'd like the group to also learn from, you can kind of email us on the WhatsApp group. We thank everybody who attended today. A very, very, very big thanks to Dr. Afari and Dr. Berko for answering this call when we reached out to them to help you guys with this panel, with this conference. We are so grateful and we hope that it was helpful to those who listened. Thank you so much for everybody who attended. And without further ado, we will adjourn. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for having us.